Welcome back to Crawlspace Insanity Remastered, where last time we focused on Fritz Smith, the protagonist of the game, the security guard who found 5 children dead at the hands of Garvey Wright. He would attempt to run away before being caught by Garvey and trapped within a cake bear suit in the parts and service crawlspace. He would inevitably die and remain in the deep. But for this video, we turn our focus to Molten Evil, aka Julie Wright, one of the core antagonists of the trilogy. She is present throughout Fritz's ordeal in the crawlspace and the main supporter of the stability ending, where Fritz would go on to die and delve deeper into the deep. Before we get into Molten Evil and her story, I have to correct a claim I made in the first story video I did, where I said that the opening dialogue before the Prelude Night was from Molten Evil, when it is in fact Insanity. There was a comment that pointed this out, and it was also confirmed by the game's wiki. On top of that, it actually makes more sense for Insanity to be speaking here, because this takes place right before Prelude, the very first night you're in the deep, which shouldn't be under Molten Evil's control. The layout is very similar to Night 6 Act 2 in Insanity's iteration of the deep, albeit simplified, and you'll rarely see Insanity randomly appear inside of the office. What this means now is that Insanity was the one who initially planned on torturing you within the deep, guilting you over your failure to save the 5 children. During this night, Molten Evil as the phone woman comes in and guides you through the night. John Wright, her son, also experienced this during his time in the deep while in a coma after a 1983 bite injury at Cake Bears. First, we'll delve into Julie Wright's origins before her time as Molten Evil, with a diary that you can access within the game. In order to get her diary, you must first complete all of the death minigames before achieving an ending on Night 6. You must then find 3 keys that can unlock her diary. These keys are found outside the confines of 3 specific death minigames, which you must quickly find. These 3 minigames are Material Witness, Corporate Ladder, and Cake Bear's Last Performance. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to cover the diary in my own videos while playing the game since I didn't know about these keys before getting either of the endings. The diary is one of the reasons why my first video took much longer to release than originally intended. I was planning on covering every aspect of the game at the time, so that would have included the diary. The problem was that at the time, if you got any of the endings, you couldn't really get the diary unlocked, and so I was waiting on an update that they kind of like addressed this issue and would make it so that you could unlock the diary even after getting an ending, but that hasn't come yet. Thankfully, however, the wiki has transcripts and images of the journal entries. Our first entry is from June 1st, 1955, when Julie was 17 to 18 years old, nearing graduation. Quote, "School will be missed, and its many exploits or stunts. Having a hand in so many things, call it a calculated immaturity, has let me write about it here, so I am leaving high school with many stories, and I see this as important. I don't remember any cases where staff actually let themselves believe I had done what I'd done, despite being clearly told, so it must be true that I am naturally sweet, believable, and appealing? I hope for this not to change. I try hard." End quote. It seems as though she, along with her friends, got into quite a bit of mischief as students, but due to her reputation as this innocent student, she never really got in trouble for it. As a result, she can write all about it while none know the wiser, and she hopes to maintain this facade. Quote, "I have been ready for a long time to move ahead from this and do worthwhile things. Brandon and I are still happily friends. He's the type to be friends with almost anyone, of course, with so many large meetings, even parties at his house that as I've often attended with Greg, Patricia, Anderson, and the likes. So of course we will all meet for graduation." End quote. Brandon here is Alex Wright's brother, so it seems she and Alex knew each other for quite a long time now, and even though she looks forward to moving on with her life and expects new changes, she still looks forward to a part of her high school life when it comes to her friends. Now, one thing that is a bit odd are the lines that she wrote at the top of her diary entries. The first entry states, "Yes, I may answer if you tap the glass." She continues her first entry a bit later, speaking about her relationship with Alex Wright, who she possibly described as a quote, "lonely, pathetic, bumbling, wannabe greaseball, desperately failing maturity, never quite let into the gatherings but watching from afar. The only reason he's ever around their gatherings is because he's Brandon's younger brother. However, she recognized that he has a spark of genius within him that she would pair greatly with, something that is obvious to her. While she doesn't view him highly, she at the very least recognizes his potential intellect. She goes on to say that, quote, just because someone is different from how they naturally appear does not mean they are intentionally lying. Everyone does it, it is normal, end quote. This is a reinforcement of the behavior she's become accustomed to, presenting this facade to those around her. In a way, she's kind of justifying the fact that she is different from what she portrays to anyone else. As she mentioned earlier, this kind of like sweet, innocent persona that she has at school. At the bottom of the page, she writes, "Follow me, I'm a friendly rabbit." We already know from the previous video that Molten Evil also goes by the name the White Rabbit. She even portrays herself as a rabbit to Fritz when she tells him to follow her back to her version of the deep in Act 2 of Night 6. So it's interesting to see that this is a moniker, or rather symbol, that she picked for herself long ago. Overall, Julie Wright has this consistent behavior of portraying herself to be someone that she's not, or in her words, being different from how they naturally appear to be. Even Insanity alludes to this behavior in Night 6 Act 2. This behavior has been core to her personality, and is not necessarily a byproduct of her death. Now, before we move on to the next entry, I want to talk about the text, "Yes, I may answer if you tap the glass." Honestly, I'm not really sure what to make of it. One visual that came to mind is, imagine a mirror with Julie's reflection. If you tap on the glass, it's possible that instead of the quote sweet Julie that everyone comes to know, it'll be the real Julie behind the facade who answers. I guess in a way it could mean that she is somewhat willing to portray her real self to someone, whoever you is. Yes, I may answer if you tap the glass. Maybe she's trying to say that instead of giving you the same persona that, or the same facade that I show everyone else, maybe I'll show you the real me, as an example. Quite a reach for sure, but given that the first entry focuses a lot on the idea behind appearances and how one person may not seem the way they are, I thought this might be an apt way to imagine her statement. Her next entry is 16 days later, with a text at the top reading, "Alex drowns." She starts off a bit sporadic, pondering about the world itself, specifically physics and nature. She then moves on to how he is spraying himself with maturity, which might explain the Alex drowns statement. The spraying in question, I imagine, is some form of cologne. Maybe she sees Alex wearing this cologne as his own personal facade, trying to be something that he just isn't, a more mature man, perhaps. The cologne maybe would serve as a temporary facade that will eventually go away. She also thinks that Alex is, quote, the type of person that wouldn't go through the effort or pain of severing their arm to save their child. But you know, they'd sure feel bad about it for the rest of their life and overcompensate by sculpting hundreds of fake arms. Honestly, with everything she's written about him so far, I sure hope Alex never got a look at her diary. If anything, maybe this might actually serve as some potential motivation for what would come later on. She would then write again about what happened after graduation. Quote, "Last night we were sitting by the creek. I wanted to relax after I had attended the ceremony. I was lost in thought to his left. He realized a deep sadness was forming in his eyes, so he moved his head completely to the right, causing the back of his head to face me. He tries to hide his weakness from me, from all women, from anyone. But I have seen it since I first saw his face. I study his sadness from the other side. I look past his skull." Yet another example of Alex trying to hide what he may consider his, quote, true self to be, his weakness. It's not clear why Alex is sad to the point of tears here, since they just graduated, but it could be because he's reminiscing the end of a big era in his life. In general, just from these two entries alone, we can see that they probably did not have a very healthy romantic relationship, even after the fact that they've had two children. Alex, on one hand, seems to be rather, I'm not sure, maybe self-conscious is the right word here, especially given his behavior in one of the Death Mini games. In general, he just is shown to be in this kind of like state of depression, and it's not clear whether the behavior that Julie noticed here was part of that depression, or, as I mentioned again, it was just a momentary sadness after graduating and moving on to a new part of their life. But besides that, Julie clearly judges Alex quite heavily. Despite the fact that she would blossom with him, she still doesn't really respect him. Now, the last entry is a huge time skip over 13 years later, on November 13th, 1968, with a text atop stating, "Come Asylum," where she explains how she sees herself as a higher being trapped in a human body. And she goes on for quite a while with this one. Quote, "I will never stand for this. I know that people who never think above themselves or question anything would tell me my disconnected worldview, my disconnect from humanity, stems from a discontent from my own life, a mental condition that impedes me from connecting to people. A simple sickness or defect, a fault. I am above deep or nuanced human connection because I have seen past humanity. I cannot connect because I have existed in places these other people have never even dreamed of. I was born as a higher being, and I will give everything to myself. I knew people would say this to me because I have seen it on my own, as I have seen everything. My mind is not human, but I was born in a human body. I can exist under this facade for as long as I want. It is control. It is not hard to smile. No feelings. Feelings are an idea and can be bent at will if you are not content to mindlessly lie to yourself. If I want not to love someone, I will not love them. To me, there is no reason it can't be this simple. I will not let anyone lie to me. I will walk in and take everything. I will not waste the effort of writing about the incident that happened earlier today that led me to record this sentiment. Damn Alex. He knows not what he does. He understands not what he says. He has always been a lost soul. I have no obligation to save him. He is unsavable. He will sink into his depression inevitably, but he will always appreciate that I picked him up and showered him in my influence, even if there comes a day that he may not admit it. Him thinking his life is hell is too close to hilarity. He has never been shoved away and forgotten like he acts like he has. I'm not going to reach out to those quacks and charlatans. This notebook is my institution. It is the only place with order where all the words are set in place for a reason. The only place with true reason. Will they really be willing to lock away someone as pretty, soft-spoken, well-spoken as me? Yes, of course, they would love it. Shut me in the room and leave me a little peephole in the wall so they could watch the grime build up in the room and let it infect and boil within me and watch my beauty break into pieces, watch all of me fall apart, and they'd savor it. My mother warning me of issues of mental commitment when I was young is the best thing she has ever done for me. I've written this bit later. Late tonight, I found Alex sitting at the television watching an investigative report called Suffer the Little Children on NBC. I don't write about it because there's nothing to say that my mom hadn't told me back then, but I've still been watching Titicut Follies over the years. I was trying to hide from Alex how much I was studying his face, and thankfully, I think he was entranced and not thinking of me in those moments. There was a lot you could gauge from just his face during that time. The secondhand guilt and parental pain is there, yes, but he definitely does not care about those children. He is an apathetic person, especially when it comes to outside situations. But you know, he is thinking of John. He always thinks of John. John is his own. Still, I cannot imagine Alex will have much energy for John's 5th birthday tomorrow. I obviously know I won't. The rest of the page contains scribbles and text such as my mind, my brain, my head. Now there is one point that needs correction here. John's 5th birthday is not in 1968. This is a plot hole that developers have recognized and plan on correcting in the future. As far as the wiki goes, John would be born in 1971. So now here things get a bit interesting because at this point it seems clear that she's been admitted to a mental institution, which explains the title of the entry. It's not clear what event led to her being institutionalized or what was the incident with Alex earlier today that led to this entry in the first place. She believes herself to be a higher being, something not human yet trapped within this body, and talks about being in a place nobody could imagine. With the revelation from Molten Evil that the deep exists in everyone's minds, one has to imagine if she has managed to visit the deep at one point. Of course, all of this causes her great frustration when she's given all sorts of excuses as to why she is the way she is. A sickness, a fault, just unhappy with her own life. All slights on her part, or rather I should say, she may perceive this to be slights towards her. Her behavior and sentiment here could explain why she eventually betrays Insanity and is in conflict with him during the events of Crawlspace. From her lines specifically, quote, I will walk in and take everything, could suggest she believes she's entitled to have whatever she wants due to who or what she believes she is. It wouldn't be hard to imagine that she saw what Insanity had to offer and chose to discard him after she got what she needed after her death. Meanwhile, we get some insight into Alex's mental state, nearing depression according to Julie, and he feels like his life is hell and has been abandoned to some extent, at least according to Julie. Quote, he has never been shoved away and forgotten like he acts like he has. We know from the Cake Bear's last performance death minigame that this depressive episode, or episodes, have not ended. Quote, I don't want to go home just to drink more. I don't even remember how long it's been since before I was like this, and it doesn't seem to get better. Now there is one thing that is a bit interesting, and it's where she kind of mentions the later part of the entry, the part that she wrote a bit later where she found Alex watching that investigative report on institutional abuse, right, suffered to little children. And my question is, when did she do this exactly? Because if she was in the asylum, how would she have seen Alex watching television? I find it hard to believe that Alex was seeing a report on institutional abuse in the same asylum that Julie is in. So it makes me wonder, what was the extent of Julie's stay here, right? Was Julie at the asylum indefinitely? Was this something where she had to visit periodically? Again, it's unclear because we don't really know why she ended up here in the first place or what led to her writing this whole entry to begin with. And even after all this, while her last entry ends quite dramatically, she would go on to live for yet another 11 years, giving birth to John in the process in 1971. And it makes me wonder how she would have left the institution in general as a result. Was she able to convince people that she had gotten better? Maybe, but again, because we don't have much information on this part of her life, it's a lot of speculation. Regardless, her life would take a massive turn soon enough. In 1979, Julie Wright, the mother of Peter and John Wright, would be killed and buried by her husband Alex, with the assistance of Peter Wright, her son, who's sworn to secrecy. One possibility is that she was taken out of the mental institution by Alex as her husband before being killed, but one would have to wonder whether this would have been allowed to begin with. After her death and burial, she is approached by Insanity, who offers a deal to give her the power she needs to get her revenge. All she needs to do is give him her soul. She would go on to sacrifice everything for this opportunity, and nothing would stand in her way. This first meeting between Molten Evil and Insanity is shown through the teaser game Burial Site, highlighting their initial interactions and how it might have led to their conflict that takes place through the events of Crawlspace. So first off, he tells Julie that he knew her death would come, which could serve as additional motivation for Julie's betrayal. Also, despite him giving her power, the circumstances come off as though insanity is taking advantage of Julie's death. She dies, he knew she was gonna die, and takes the opportunity to offer her all this power in exchange for her soul. We don't know why exactly he was seeking her out, but Julie might have also kind of noticed this, and might have served as additional motivation once again for her subsequent betrayal. With this power, eventually Alex would end up in her hands so she could exact her revenge. And based off Insanity's words, it seems to imply that souls damned from Alex and his quote-unquote creations would possibly be hers too. In a way, this is kinda backed up when Molten Evil tells Fritz that Peter and Garvey will soon make their way here to the deep, and one could argue that their souls were damned by Alex in some twisted domino effect that started with the death of Julie Wright, along with the murders that Garvey committed. Now, of course, that leads me to wonder, will she have control over Garvey's victims, since they would kind of fit into this whole domino effect theory? I think that could be possible, since Fritz is technically a victim of Garvey and ended up in the deep themselves. Of course, the main problem with this is that, for one, we know that the deep is a part of everyone's mind, so it doesn't seem like anyone would be excluded from being in the deep. Insanity would then go on to give her the opportunity to see events in the future and even in the past. All he needs is a year, or in some instances, a code. There's actually a lot of different inputs that provide different types of responses here, so I'll first start off with the more important, clearer ones, and then cap it off with more speculative answers. First off, entering continuous digits like 0000 and 1111 result in the text prelude and deep respectively. Entering 2222 gives the response watch your head, which at first initially lined up with Insanity's location in the deep according to the wiki, which had coordinates listed as 2222, but this information seems to have been removed, at least I haven't been able to find it again. 3333 states, quote, a burning building. Boiling is a lingering feeling of bitter unresolution. You are now entering 1111, or in other words, the deep. This could be a reference to how someone related to Julie will end up in the deep after a grisly death. Now starting off with actual years here, in 1943, Julie would be around 5 to 6 years old and is said to be mentally ill. Given what we know about her through the journal entries, could this be around the time she started believing she wasn't human? Could this be around the time where she actually maybe experienced the deep and subsequently started believing that she was this sort of higher power? In 1962, she would be pregnant with Peter. In 1974, Cake Bears would have its grand opening. 1979, Alex commits an act he would later regret, with a short minigame expressing Alex's regret. I made a mistake. We then take a look at where it seems Julie was killed by Alex, with a giant puddle of blood on the ground. His regret over the murder of his wife probably connects to Alex's depression in 1982 in the Cake Bears last performance minigame. Speaking of which, in 1982, the same year as that minigame, Cake Bears would close and Fredbear's opens, since at that point in time, Tom's body was discovered in a dumpster outside Cake Bears. A year later, in 1983, while Cake Bears remained closed, tragedy haunts the brand in the form of John's bite injury, which landed him in a coma and subsequently in the deep for an unknown period of time. 1984, Brandon Meek, brother of Alex Wright, dies in a spring lock incident. 1986, Peter couldn't see it coming. I believe this should be a reference to Peter's discovery of Garvey's murders that have taken place thus far, since dialogue between Peter and Garvey confirmed that the murders in 1987 were not the first murders he's covered up.
Did anyone else see you? No. Are you sure? This is important. Yes, I'm sure. You fucking promised me that Maria was the last, but don't even say that. You can such hope. You blame me for your actions. Not bullshit. Just go. I don't think you understand the gravity of our situation here. This isn't just some loose end you can cleanly sleep under the bed. You considered... I don't even want to think about it. It makes me fucking sick. I know what this is. Garvey, I need you to be honest. For once in your life, just please be honest with me. Is there anything else I need to know about? Well, exactly things, Vito. But I swear to God, if you screw me on this, I will not help you out. It won't come to you.
The year of Fritz, 1987. Someone that Molten Evil would come to like. This is something that I remain curious about even now. What is it with her fixation on Fritz and what happens to him in the Crawlspace? Why was she so obsessed with him choosing stability? And why did Insanity believe that she would fixate on him at all? 6 years after Fritz's death in 1993, Peter would come to meet his own demise in a Golden Freddy suit connected to a bloody telephone. Now, the next date is 2001, which is a rather odd one, being the only year that Insanity refuses to elaborate on. In 2002, someone will suffer a glorious fate, being Garvey according to the wiki. In 2008, he says you'll like this, which is a rather vague response. At least based off what I saw in the wiki, I didn't see any events that took place in the year 2008. In 2017, you will have your day. The same year as Garvey's spiritual death, which is interesting. Maybe this is pointing to the idea that one day Julie will face her own spiritual death as Molten Evil and finally rest. In 2018 and 2023, she will sleep twice, which could be connected to both Alex's death, as you know, in the physical sense and the spiritual sense. But this part is a little weird because again, it happens twice. Why would it take place within this 5-year gap? Also, there's no actual death date given for Alex, so we can't even really confirm if he ever does die. The idea of sleeping could point to some form of peace, but again, another one of those ambiguous dates. Finally, in 2024, Flip. Now, there are some interesting codes referencing specific dates, like 1109 or November 9th, where Sanity expects to see Julie in the Crawlspace, which I believe is the prelude night where she was supposed to play some supporting role in Fritz's torture the day he got trapped. What's even more interesting is the code 1114, which is 6 days later, the same day that Molten Evil would then rescue Fritz, and he makes his final choice. This is based on the fact that we know that the missing children incident and Fritz's disappearance happened in early November. Now what's interesting is Insanity's reaction to these codes, especially the last one where he says, "You know not what you do." From the sounds of it, it sounds as though he knew Molten Evil would eventually betray him, or at the very least do something that she shouldn't have done. She may have not realized the consequences of her actions. We don't know the exact limits of Insanity's insight into the future, so it's possible he's still somewhat in the dark about her betrayal. Other codes like 1101, which just spells Gunnar backwards, why unless Renug is actually supposed to have some sort of significant meaning here, or 0621, row 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 your boat, have left me stumped. We then have 0115, the voice of purple, which refers to Garvey, but the numbers itself remains ambiguous. It could be his birthday or when Garvey was adopted by the Wright family. There is one more code that I learned of that doesn't relate to a date specifically, but an individual, and we'll talk about that one later in the video. As for the rest of the codes, Insanity essentially provides a timeline of the events surrounding the Wright family and their restaurant's tragedies. But how did Molten Evil go on to clash with Insanity and betray them? We briefly discussed how her belief, or the fact that she may be a higher being, might have instigated her betrayal towards Insanity, but it's not clear cut. However, we do know that the ripple effects of her betrayal seem to take root at the very beginning of the game, when the game switches from Insanity, or Prelude.exe, to Crawlspace.exe. In the midst of your first night at 3 AM, or nearing 3 AM, when Yellow Bear arrives at your hallway, the game begins to glitch and eventually crashes due to it being, quote, heavily modified, and prompts you to start up Crawlspace instead. I think the game's modification is linked to Molten Evil's betrayal towards insanity, if not the act of betrayal itself. This idea extends to our own world on GameJolt. If you search up Insanity Remastered on GameJolt, you'll come across two games. The first, and most well-known one, is the one I'm talking about right now, Crawlspace Insanity Remastered by an Aberrant team, previously known as the Trilogy Collective. There is, however, another game that's called Insanity Remastered Official by Insanity Games, with the profile picture consisting of Insanity Sprite from Burial Site. Unlike Crawlspace, Insanity Remastered Official only has a demo that is quite similar to the Crawlspace demo. Now, one thing I did want to know about these demos, even though they kind of list themselves as 3-night demos, I've only played 2 of the nights. I was never able to find out how to get the 3rd night. Honestly, I always assumed that it was like one of those things like, oh, it's supposed to be 3 nights, but not really. It might be something that I just haven't looked into quite enough. Now, the creator of Insanity Remastered Official, Insanity Games, claims that their game is the real official remaster, while the quote White Rabbit's creation is a fan-made one. This is an extension of the game identity crisis, for lack of a better term, that occurs in Crawlspace. At first, it was Insanity's game. It was his dialogue at the very beginning. It was his version of the Freddy's establishment, which would end up getting sabotaged and stolen by the White Rabbit. In terms of the game Crawlspace, we know that Prelude becomes Crawlspace.exe with her vision of Freddy's. And now that is kind of extended to the real world, where the game Crawlspace was essentially hijacked by the White Rabbit, and now Insanity is trying to rebuild what was once theirs. As a result, they each have their own game, with Insanity urging players to follow their game, the true remaster, rather than Molten Evil's unofficial creation. Hell, he tries the same thing with Fritz on Night 6, by saying that he is a voice that, quote, will not lie to you. It will not rely on other people. It is not hers. Towards the end of this call, he states, quote, I am always with you. Now it can conclude where it was always meant to, where it began, since this would have likely been part of Insanity's own game, his vision. That's why I think the betrayal that Molten Evil committed was the hijacking of Insanity's own game, and to some extent, the Deep itself. Of course, despite my theories on why she did all this, the possible reasonings I provided when we were looking at the journal entries, we'll have to see her next move in the sequel even-handed. She does have one final appearance though in another game titled ID-12, a teaser for the final game in the Slumber Trilogy, Gateway Dormitibus Remastered. Finding this one is a bit interesting because we actually have to go to the Insanity Remastered page, not Crawlspace Remastered. In the game's description, the number 2 in FNAF 2 is highlighted red, which is not presented the same way in the Crawlspace game page. Clicking on the number 2 opens a link to another game page called ID-12 by an Aberrant team, with a description stating this is severely unstable and must be looked into. Now, I actually made a video covering this teaser, but there was no dialogue on my end. However, the wiki has screenshots with dialogue specified there. So, what happens in ID-12? You control Havoc Puppet, who we briefly saw in one death minigame after the normal puppet gave life to the dead children that Fritz failed to save. Havoc Puppet heads over to Molten Evil and acquires their plasma, using it on the Cake Bear suit to bring it back to life and make a new body. The Cake Bear suit comes to life as a regular suit before it becomes bloody and turns green, now possessed by Fritz Smith. Molten Evil finally says that this may be your best yet, referencing how the puppet has given new life to spirits in the past. This teaser game essentially confirms that by the time that we reach the 3rd game in the trilogy, Fritz is still in the Deep. It also confirms that Garvey's 5 victims also end up in the deep, as the Box of Abominations, that amalgamation that is shown in the puppet's death minigame. This reinforces Insanity's claim about all those damned by Alex and his creations ending up here. Now, in the same teaser game, if you interact with the blinking arcade machine, you get an entry for Fritz Smith with ID 12, known as Cake Bear. They're described as being extremely sluggish and unresponsive in the beginning, but can still be rabid or feral like those that have come before him. Unfortunately though, he still hasn't gotten over experience in this crawlspace, struggling with paralysis and panic. So now we get a better idea of the roles that Fritz and Molten Evil might play in the third game. Now, given that we just spoke about ID 12 being Cake Bear, there is actually one more ID that is revealed by Insanity. In Burial Site, if you enter the code 1231, you get the acronym BLR, an alias for the Wise Offspring, aka BitHell, the director of An Aberrant Team. A while back, their account was named The Wise Offspring, but is now renamed BitHell. However, if you search up The Wise Offspring on GameJolt, there's a page going by the name ID05 at The Wise Offspring, with a post that states, "I know better than to believe that my existence isn't a mere case study for whatever I've been selected to become." Alex was right. I guess he always was. ID05's profile picture is an individual with glasses, and their bio states, "My name is censored. She forgot about me. I was never as important, thankfully. I like to think that she spared me as a form of intimacy, some echo from our past endeavors shining through whatever she's been reduced to. But I know better than to believe something like that." This is Brandon Meek, Alex Wright's brother, who used to be good friends with Julie Wright. Their profile bio correlates some of the statements that were found in Julie's diary, some echo from our past endeavors. I'd like to think that she spared me as a form of intimacy. It all suggests a friendship during a more innocent time, as Julie Wright mentioned during her high school days. And now, Brandon barely recognizes what she's become. However, it seems that Julie may have still had a soft spot for him. Given that we also know Brandon died in 1984, his presence in the deep is not too surprising. It should also be noted that one of the Wise Offspring's aliases is also Brandon. He states in this post that he was, quote, selected to become something, similar to how Fritz would be selected to become a form of Cake Bear, ID 12. Now it's a matter of what character he will take form as in the following sequels. What is ID 05? Finally, he goes on to say that Alex was right, and always was. But while it seems like this is in relation to Julie, it's unclear as to what. If anything, there is a lot that remains unknown regarding Julie's life, especially in that 11-year gap between her last diary entry and her death, besides the birth of her son John and the adoption of Garvey Wright. As a result, I'm curious to see where her story goes in the sequel, and what new information we can kind of get that helps uncover more of her life. But that concludes our look into Molten Evil, Julie Wright, the higher being trapped in a human body, who has lots of plans for those who visit the deep. This video was originally going to cover more of the antagonists, but it seems like the more and more I found to talk about Molten Evil, the more I realized the video, I would run into a similar issue with the first video where it might feel a bit disorganized. So next time, we'll be taking a closer look into Insanity, as well as the Deep as a whole, regarding all the different threats that Fritz had to face during his time here. But of course, with all of that said, I hope you did enjoy. If you did, leave a like, hit that notification bell to keep up to date on future videos. The game will be in the description below as always. And if you're interested in seeing any more of my other story breakdowns, there will be a playlist in the description below, as well as a playlist to the overall playthrough of Crawlspace.